I'm Donlyn Arbuthnot Whissen. I'm here today because I grew up in downtown Boulder hearing stories about my family who came for gold out in 1859 and then settled at Haystack Mountain and lived there for many, many years. I'm dressed today as my great-grandmother, Mary Bader Arbuthnot, and I'm here to tell her story as though I'm her.
Good.
Donlyn Arbuthnot is a 5th century native of Boulder County. She graduated with a degree in history from Colorado State University, where she learned how to do original research original records. Her interest in history led to storytelling and genealogy. Her Arbuthnot ancestors originated in Scotland, and her Bader ancestors originated in Germany. But she's not our speaker. Please allow me to introduce St. Vrain Valley pioneer and the owner of Haystack Mountain, Mrs. Mary Elizabeth Bader Arbuthnot.
Good day. Good day to you all. What's the date today? April 13th, 1902. That's right. April 13th, 1902. Well, it's been a while, 20 years since my husband passed. And it was April 15th of 1882 when he was kicked in the chest by a colt when he was branding the yearling, branding it with the number 44. And he died about 10 days after that. So I think I'll come out of mourning today. I will take my cap off. It's been nearly 20 years now. As Harry introduced me, I am who am I? I am Mary Bader Arbuthnot. Haven't always been an Arbuthnot. Originally I was only a Bader. And as Harry mentioned, my family came from Germany. I was born on June 17th, 1848 in Baden-Baden, Germany. My father, John George Bader, he was a soldier, and he fought for the king until the army decided to fight against the monarchy and try to throw the revolt against the monarchy in Germany. And when they did that, they were successful for a while, dethroning the Habsburgs. But then the Habsburgs came back into power, and it became a very dangerous time for those who had been soldiers against the monarchy. So what was the safest thing for us, our family, our Baders to do? But come to America. Well, it was myself. I was 5 years old at the time, 1852. My father, John George Bader, he didn't like to go by George, or John, he liked to go by George. My mother, Mary Messenger Bader. My baby brother, he was just a babe in arms, only 2 years old, Fred Bader. And my uncle, Nicholas Ernst Bader. We went to this port city, Hamburg-Altona. Some of you have heard of the community of Altona? Well, that is named for the last place that we saw Germany, which was the port there at Altona, or Altona, as they say in Germany. And when there, we got onto this big ship. It had big, billowy sails. I had fun running up and down the deck on that ship. I was excited to go to this new place. I got to taste things I'd never tasted before. Rosehip tea, sweet oranges, and pickled eggs. They tickled my tongue. It was quite a joy to have those new flavors at such a young age. Well, we set sail for America. It was to take about 3.5, 4 weeks to arrive, but we were still in the middle of the ocean at 4 weeks. Water was everywhere. I heard my father say to his brother, "This ship is unseaworthy. We're floundering." We were lost at sea. Now, I know some of you study this kind of thing of people coming to America, and you'll tell me it didn't take 6 months to come to America. But I'm telling you, I was 5 years old, and that's how I remember it. So 6 months at a time, we landed in New York. All was safe and all was sound. From New York, our family went to Ohio. There we settled with some other Germans. But our father had heard that there were more opportunities for the West. So we loaded up the family, took wagons, and we started out walking to Iowa. And we walked and walked. One day, my mother, she just fell to the ground. Mother, what? Mother? She was dead. Just in an instant, she was gone. We had to bury her right there on the path. And we continued on. When we arrived in Iowa, my uncle found opportunities in Marion County, but my father met a woman who was from Polk County, Susan Van Dorn. He married this woman, and she had children of her own by her previous marriage. A widow she was before my father married her. We settled in, and we seemed happy enough there. We were very close to where my uncle lived, so we got to see him. But then, one April in 1861, something happened. What happened? Do you remember? Yes, sir. Fort Sumter. That shot was fired, and President Abraham Lincoln gave a call to arms and said, "Come fight for the Union." Well, you can imagine my father, being the good soldier that he was in Germany, took up that call to arms. He joined the Company A of the Iowa 10th Infantry, and off he went. In Vicksburg, he was wounded in the thigh, and he had to heal up. So he joined up again in 1862 and went on with Sherman. In South Carolina, he was wounded again in the cheek, and he carried on. He was with Sherman on his march to the sea and was mustered out in 1864. Now, mind you, our understanding when he signed up was he'd be gone 100 days. Well, he was gone for 4 years. Now, when my papa came home, we realized that his second wife was not really the woman that he thought that he had married. So, this was 1865. He divorced her as soon as he came home. And my brother and I were really glad. You know, in the 1860 census, when we were living with her, the census taker left 2 blank lines on the census for our household, because he knew there were 2 more people in that household. That was my brother and me. We didn't get on the census. We got left off. But our father's on the census. Well, we were glad to be heading off to Colorado. In 1866, we loaded up a wagon again and took our provisions with us. Now, if you'd like to hear about what it took to take a trip out, I ask you to invite my friend Phoebe Steele to come and talk to your group, and she'll tell you all about what it was like on the wagon train. It was there on the wagon train that we met another Iowan, William Arbuthnot. Yes, he became my husband eventually. Well, Mr. Arbuthnot, he was an interesting man. He'd already been out to the gold fields. Oh, and I should mention why we were heading to the gold fields. You see, our Uncle Nicholas in 1859, he got all excited when he heard the call. What is it that he heard? Gold. Pikes Peak or bust. That was what he heard, and off he went. So we were headed out to Colorado to go and find him. We weren't even sure exactly where he was. But Mr. Arbuthnot, he said he knew my uncle, my father's brother. So off we went. It was around the campfire. At night, in the morning, we had a cow with us, and we'd milk the cow, and we'd put some milk in a jar. We'd tighten up that jar real tight, and we'd lay it down in the wagon, and that jar would roll around with the milk in it. So at night, when we sat around the campfire, we'd make up some biscuit dough, and I didn't have a Dutch oven, but we would make room in the ambers and brush off the ambers. We'd slop down a bit of that biscuit dough and cover it up with the ambers. Those were our ash biscuits. We'd pop them off the ground and slit them open, put some of that fresh butter that we had made out of the jar. You know, we'd made the biscuits with the buttermilk, slap on a slice of bacon, and that was our dinner. Then we'd sit around the fire, and the fire would crackle up and burn our nose a little bit, but oh, it was a warm, good feeling after walking for so long during the day. When we were around the campfire, that's when William told us about the Arbuthnot family. You see, the Arbuthnot's were an old family linked to the royalty of Scotland. He told us about how Lord Arbuthnot became the Lord. Do you want to hear the Arbuthnot story too? Yeah. Okay. Well, the Arbuthnot's, excuse me, I'm a bit parched. Let me get my coffee here. You know, it's always good to bring a bit of cowboy coffee with you. You know, you pour in the grounds and pour in the water, get it to boiling, and then you throw in the pine needles to hold the grounds down. Well, the Arbuthnot's started out in Scotland at the time of the first king, King William. And King William went to the Crusades, and one of the knights that he took with him was Osbert of Olefard. Now, how would you like to research that name? Well, Osbert of Olefard was a good knight, and he came back from the Holy Lands, and King William said, I will give you land, because owning land, that was the gold in Scotland at that time. And he pulled out his sword, and he dubbed him as a laird of the land. Well, Osbert of Olefard didn't have enough fighting, so he went back to the Holy Land where he was killed. And Hugh de Swinton came along and married the heiress of the land. It was their son who decided that where the River Brevy on the land and another creek came together, that was a point of healing power. And a Babbith is a point of healing power. And a Buthanach is that power that will heal. Or excuse me, a Babbith is where two rivers converge. And the Buthanach is that power that heals. So they became the Ababer-Buthanots. The Ababer-Buthanots, thank the Lord, was later changed to Arbuthnot. Well, at the time of King James, they had quite an estate there in the Arbuthnot lands, and many sons were born to Lord and Lady Arbuthnot. They took up the faith of the Calvinists and became Presbyterians. But King James and Queen Anne before him said, no, Presbyterians will be hung. That Catholicism is the faith of choice. Well, Lord and Lady took up the faith of Catholicism to protect their lands, but the rest of the family went to Northern Ireland and settled there. That's where my husband's grandfather came from. Samuel Arbuthnot I had a shipping business there. And he had quite a lucrative shipping business, but he saw opportunities in America as well. So sometime before 1890s, Samuel decided to settle some land in the New World. And the way he did that is when you purchased your ship's passage, you also got some land with it. Now, a woman who's married would receive no acreage at all, but a widow would receive 80 acres, and the child of a widow would just receive 40 acres each. So Samuel dressed up his first wife as a widow, and with babe in arms put her on a ship, sent her to the New World. Now pray tell, do not deceive. If you deceive, she fell in love with the ship's captain. When they got to America, she ran off with him. William had not heard from her for many years. So just before about 1790, he came to America looking for her. Distraught, he didn't find her. So he filed the paperwork. And what does a young man do when he is distraught? He joins the army. It was about the time that the Revolutionary War was winding down and things had come to an end, but there was still a whiskey rebellion in Pennsylvania. And so William did receive a Revolutionary War pension for having served in the Whiskey Rebellion, although he is not really considered a revolutionary soldier. Well, it was when he was staying in one of the homes as a soldier that he met a young woman, Esther McMarlin. Her photograph is over there. And Esther fell deeply in love. She was very smitten. So she wanted to marry Samuel, and Samuel wanted to marry her. But her father, John McMarlin, said, no, no, no. First of all, Samuel was 21 years older than Esther. And second, he had already been married. Well, what do you do when your father doesn't want you to marry the man of your dreams? You elope. And they went off to Pine Township of Allegheny County in Pennsylvania. There, they had all of their children. And it turned out to be a mighty good marriage as well, for Esther gave birth 21 times. Are you okay now? I'm not sure myself how she did that. That's where my father-in-law, Carson, was born. And Carson and Robert were the middle children in the family. James Gibson was one of the youngest in the family. And when Samuel died, the inheritance went to the youngest of the family. So the youngest, being the Presbyterian tradition was, the youngest in the family received the inheritance. So the rest of the family, the other men, had to find a way to make their living. They had made their living in timbering in the lumber mills, having a lumber mill there in Allegheny County. So they heard of this new lands out west in Iowa. 1850, Robert Arbuthnot headed out to Iowa, and shortly after, Carson, Franny, and all of their children headed out and settled in Tama County in Iowa. Well, that's pretty close to where the Baders were, huh? Yeah, Tama. It's close to Marion and Polk County. So, what was it that they heard then in 1859 in Iowa? Gold, Pike's Peak or bust. They heard the same thing. Same thing that Nicholas Bader had heard. Well, Carson come home and said, we're going to go make our fortune out there in the West. We're not going to have to go over the mountains all the way to California. So he loaded up, and with his 4 sons, Samuel, William, James, and Charles. Now, I hope you all are following along on the family tree there. And you can see Charles is not on that family tree. You know, the 4 sons are the good, the bad, the ugly, and the missing. Charles is missing. I'll explain a little bit about that a little later. Well, so here we are back in 1866. It was a lot of fun sitting around those campfires, hearing about the Arbuthnot family. You know, Carson Arbuthnot, William's father, he was up in Gold Hill with James and the other brothers spread out looking for gold. And he became voted in as sheriff up there in Gold Hill in 1860. And some of you, I heard you talking about some of the other folks that were up there. McCaslin, is it? And Mr. Hossel. Mr. Coffin. Us, we Arbutnots don't care much for Mr. Coffin. Well, we were up there in the Arbutnots were up there in the Gold Hills up there when Carson was sheriff up there. There were 41 miners present when he was voted in as sheriff. Took 17 votes for him to win that because there were 4 people that ran for sheriff that night. Peter Hossel was one of them. He got 1 vote. So I felt pretty good about this Arbuthnot family. They kind of knew the area. I knew them being part of the law to where we were headed. We arrived to this area, went up to Jamestown, and found my Uncle Bader, my Uncle Nicholas Bader. My father was up there and was digging in the dirt. He wasn't really much of a miner, but he did enjoy growing things. And he disproved the fact that you could not grow fruit in Jamestown. But he realized that down on the plains, you could do a better job to grow fruit. So we came down and settled just west of Haystack Mountain. Well, guess who was settled just on the other side of Haystack Mountain? William Arbuthnot. There were lots of people coming down from Gold Hill and settling, like Mr. Hossel. He got his farm out there. In fact, there's a map right here. This is the Samuel J. Fries map from 1880. And there's lots of names here that some of you folks might be familiar with. This blue area here was my father's, and the green is William Arbuthnot's. Well, my father, now he's a single man again, decided to invest in some property and purchased a building on Pearl Street there in Boulder. It was known as the Bader Block. And there was a young lady that worked in one of those stores in his Bader Block, Miss Mary Roberts. He thought Miss Mary Roberts was a fine woman. And she had 2 children. You see, she was still married. Her husband was up in Boulder County up by Greeley, farming. But he courted her and convinced her that they would be a good couple. But she said, no, I'm not moving out into the country. I'm sorry, I'm here to educate my 2 sons, so I'm not moving out to the country. So, what did George do? He didn't take no for an answer. He built the Bader Schoolhouse out there on Oxford Road. Well, they got married, and a month later, they went up to Weld County there in Greeley and got her a divorce. She was a proper woman. So that's where all of my children went to school. Well, actually, I should back up just a bit, because I was the first teacher there at the Bader Schoolhouse, and they decided to have a picnic for me one day to thank me for my work and my father's building the schoolhouse. And that's where I really took a shine into Mr. Arbuthnot. Well, we were married on March 14th of 1869, and 8 months later, our first son, Fred, came. I don't know why you're snickering. We had 6 more children there. We built our house there, and we outfitted our house. Now, my uncle, Nicholas, he had 3 sons. What were their names? It's on the paperwork. Frank, William, and George. These were the Bader brothers, and their father had died at a young age. My Uncle Nicholas, he was one of the ditch diggers and was working with Samuel Arbuthnot with the Left-Hand Ditch Company and digging the ditches. And this is why we don't like Mr. Coffin. Because Samuel was up at Brainerd Lake and had diverted water out of the James Creek into the left hand. So the Longmont folks where Coffin was farming didn't have any water. And they went up there with their dynamite and dynamited Samuel's dams so the water would come back down to them. Well, Samuel said, well, that's not right. After all, the Arbutnots have been here since June 20th of 1859. So they went to court. They not only went to court, they went to the state Supreme Court. Samuel had to wait for Colorado to become a state in order for them to go to court. But left hand won over Mr. Coffin. So Mr. Coffin has never been much of a friend of our family's. But boy, do we have water now. So what do you think that we grow out on our farm? Beets? We didn't start out growing sugar beets. You know, the Coes, they were farming there where Oh, there's a big business there. But just east of Niwot was where they were farming, and it was all alkali flats, and all their cattle were dying. The Falters had gone down with them to bring cattle up from Missouri and Texas, but all their cattle died because it was all alkali flats. There was just nothing growing there for them to be able to survive on. So the Colts sold their property and went out to a penny an acre, by the way, is what they sold the property for. They went down to Missouri and they saw these cattle that were all fattened up. They said, how did they get so nice and fat? They said, oh, sugar beets. They said, well, show us these sugar beets. So they brought sugar beets back home with them and was selling them to the farmers and convincing the farmers that they should be growing sugar beets. Now, this was before the sugar beet companies came to Colorado. They will tell you they're the ones that brought the sugar beets. Well, the cattle got fattened up. We did pretty well on our farms. We did grow sugar beets eventually, but we just grew hay and vegetables. You know, in 1860, excuse me, let me refer to my book here. I'm not sure what the date was, but one of the days, one head of cabbage would go for $10. So, got my diary here. 1865, one large cabbage was sold for $10. My taxes that I paid at Haystack Mountain, I had 320 acres, was $61.69 for county taxes, $17 for state taxes. The school district got $20. You know, that was our Bader schoolhouse. The interest we paid was $2.47, and the capital building fund we paid $2.13. Now, our income for 1882, this was the year that my husband died. The sale of wheat was $715, sale of hay was $115, and the sale of oats, we got $18.25. Our ditch assessment for that year was $10. Are any of you folks on the ditch? No. Things have changed. Well, there were 16 animals that were auctioned off when my husband died, and we had quite an auction. You know, it's Mr. Nichols, who's mostly known for the Sand Creek Massacre. He came out and he was the auctioneer at the auction where they sold off my husband's property. My husband was going to be sorely missed. You know, we were members there at the church, the Hygiene Church. We were German Baptist Brethren. We were Dunkards. To be a Dunkard, you had to be dunked in the water 3 times. Then you could get into heaven. You were baptized then. Mr. Flory, that was the minister there, he came around to the schools and introduced us to the beliefs. And the beliefs were that you don't fight. We were pacifists. That's why my husband was the good Arbuthnot. He didn't fight in the Sand Creek Massacre. He didn't believe in fighting the Indians. And we were often visited at Haystack Mountain by the Indians. Now, his brother James did fight the Indians. He did sign up with Captain Nichols and was at the Sand Creek Massacre. Nathaniel, we call him the Ugly because, you know, he did get his dam dynamited when he was getting the water for the community and got into trouble then. Now Charles, he homesteaded out there north of that area of Haystack Mountain as well. But a young woman whose husband had come out for gold in '59, Mr. Edward Duncha Steele, he had come out and had gotten his gold. Actually, he made more money building water wheels than he did in gold. Went back to get his wife, and what does he do when he gets back to see his wife? Got her pregnant. So they waited for the baby to be born, and after JD came, then they came out to Colorado again in 1865. And Mr. Steele died 11 days after they arrived. So Charles sold his homestead for $1.25 an acre to Mrs. Steele, and then she homesteaded another 160 acres right next to them. So Mrs. Steele became one of my dear friends. Well, we had many a picnics, many a good times. We all became members of the Altona Grange when my brother and Samuel Arbuthnot built that Grange there. And one of the picnics, do you know what that Phoebe Steele brought to the picnic just for me? Pickled eggs. Now, do any of you have any comments or questions for me? Do you have any questions about how we lived out at Haystack or what we did? Yes, sir.
Where are you going to be buried?
You're going to bury me already.
Your husband's dead, but you're still alive.
My husband's died, so of course we buried him out at the Dunkard Cemetery, at the Dunkard Church there in Hygiene, the German Brethren Church, and that's where I will be buried as well. I will have my own headstone, and I will have the name Bader on my headstone. Any other questions?
After your husband died, what did you do? How'd you live?
How did I live? Well, my sons grew up very fast. They were, let's see, my youngest was only 2, but my oldest was 12. Fred was 12 at that time, and his brother was 11. So Fred and William and George, they became farmers and learned the trade. For the first year, I did hire a man out, Mr. Smith, but I didn't like that very much, didn't trust him. I did have to file with the court every year what our family took in and what we spent our money on. So Mr. Sylvanus Buck, he was very kind to act as guardian for me for the courts. So that allowed me to keep the land. In fact, I was able to not only keep the 240 acres that William had originally purchased, but I also was able to purchase more. And there was a family that had claimed Haystack Mountain as their homestead, but they had a daughter that died and they wanted to go back to the States. So I agreed to take care of their daughter's grave in exchange for Haystack Mountain, and I purchased it from them for $60. So I am the first person who has gone on record as owning Haystack Mountain from the government.
Where was William, or Frederick William, your brother, buried?
Frederick William, well, that's kind of a long story. That's kind of another day. He is buried in California. Yeah, but his wife is buried up in Jamestown.
Right.
Yeah.
Ada.
Yeah, Ada Boot. Yes, she's a member of the Boot family. Yes, ma'am.
What is Haystack Mountain? Was that a volcano, or do you know anything about the geology of it?
Well, you know, this is 1902, and there's a lot of stories about how Haystack was created. Some think it was just the way the Indians had pulled on the mountains to make the mountains buckle up. But, you know, it's 1902, I'm not really sure. Yes, ma'am.
Were the Ute Indians and Chief Niwot around when your forebears came in 1850?
Yes, they were. Not the Utes so much. They were more up in the mountains. So when our family was up in Gold Lake area, the Utes were up there. But yes. But not only were the Arapahoes here when our family came, Chief Niwot was also sent back east to determine if farming was what the Arapahoes should take up and settle down and be in one place and just farm. Well, they didn't know what farming was, so they headed out back east to see what farming was. And so there may have been some encounters with Chief Niwot in Iowa before the family ever came to Colorado. At least that's the family myth. Yes, sir?
Do you remember much more about Nicholas?
That he was a very kind man, and I loved him dearly, just as any girl would love her uncle. He was a good ditch digger. You know, he would tie a rag onto the wheel of the ditch digger, and he knew just how to drop down that ditch digger so the water would flow just right, so you wouldn't get too much water on the land, and just enough water on the land. And he was really good at knowing how to do that.
Well, let me bring up my daughter-in-law, and not daughter-in-law, excuse me, my granddaughter, and she will be happy to wrap up this presentation. Before you is a list of all the sources of research that I have done on the family. And I have met Lord and Lady Arbuthnot of Scotland. They arrived and found the first Arbuthnot's outside of Scotland when they stayed in Denver, and they looked in the phone book and found my father and family. And they called my father. And so we were the first American Arbuthnot's that Lord and Lady Arbuthnot got to meet. And that generated a family association meeting that still meets today. And it also generated this hope to put together a family tree. They created a family tree not only in North America, but also in Europe and in Australia. So there's many, many books of Arbuthnot genealogy. Back on the table is table 1, which is Samuel Arbuthnot's. This is just from that one man, Samuel Arbuthnot, that came from Northern Ireland. This is his descendants, and our Colorado Arbuthnot's are in there. We're still working on going all the way back to the Baders. One thing I didn't mention in my storytelling too is the Falter cabin that is here in Longmont. This little dot is Haystack Mountain, in the green area. Here is where the Arbuthnot's were. This area right next to it is where the Falter cabin was located. And my great-grandmother, Mary Bader, said that she was a relative of Mrs. Falter, and that she was from Switzerland as well. But I've never been able to make the connection and get that, substantiate that. Well, thank you very much. It's been a lot of fun, and please.